Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. We are so excited to be a community partner with the 45th Annual Cleveland International Film Festival on the film Miracle Fishing, Kidnapped Abroad. My name is Delaney. I am the operations manager of Shape Cleveland, and we are the partner organization on this film. This is my partner, Patrick Fenner. He is the chief executive officer at Shape Cleveland. We wanted to let everyone know that we are going to be recording tonight's conversation. Just like the film festival, we want this to be accessible. And so we are going to have this available after the event as well for people to watch and see the Q&A play out. We want to encourage everyone to use the Q&A feature here on Zoom. There's a chat box and a Q&A box. Use the Q&A box to ask questions throughout. We are going to answer some live questions at the end. So please ask questions throughout and we will keep tabs on those as we go. Before we get started, we want to tell a little bit about Shape Cleveland. We are a 501c3 nonprofit based here in Northeast Ohio, and we do professional photo and video with an emphasis on hands-on education. What that means is that we work with clients just like a production company would, but all of our work has a team of students working alongside our partnered professionals so they can learn hands-on what it's like to work in the film industry, create content, and learn how to do photography and film. Without further ado, we are so excited to be discussing the film Miracle Fishing, Kidnapped Abroad as part of the 45th Annual Cleveland International Film Festival. And we are joined tonight by the film's director, editor, writer, producer, Miles Hargrove.
All right, there we go. Hey.
Yeah.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. We're so excited. We have obviously both watched the film. The film is part of the Cleveland Film Festival, and we are really excited to get into some questions that we have had, and then some pre-submitted questions from individuals as well.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and grateful to you for having me, as a guest.
Awesome. So the first thing we kind of wanted to ask is very, it's kind of broad, but this film was 25 years in the making. And how did it feel to dive back into this story, this project, all of the footage, looking through the eyes of yourself when you were 20, 21, around that age?
Well, it was interesting because it didn't take 25 years to actually make the film, but there were various stages throughout that 25 years where I worked on it really diligently. And, the first being getting the interviews that I needed, and then starting to kind of piece some of that together. What's interesting, basically, I thought I was going to get it done in like 2 years or something, and I was extremely naive because it costs money to make a documentary. Everybody that I needed to talk to were spread out across the world, so that costs money. It just took time. And then through a series of events happened that kind of slowed me down, and then including the death of my parents. They both died very quickly, one after the other, in 2009 through 2011. And that pretty much, I was starting to get some real momentum at that time, but that kind of, I had to put it away, and I put it away for 8 years or so, and worked on other projects with other people, and then got to a point where I just was ready. I could see the 25-year anniversary coming, and I was like, I'm not getting any younger. I've got to get this film made. So I dove back into it. So at that stage, when I was looking at it, it was actually quite different from when I had dealt with the material before. I mean, for several reasons. One is I was older. I was a father. My parents had passed away. But, and so the way that I looked at some of the footage, there's some scenes in there, including one in particular, like right before we make a ransom payment, my mom and her friend Linda, my mom's got this real nervous energy, and she just has this real need to play Benny Goodman, and she dances, and it was really embarrassing. Like, the more kind of youth-oriented me, like more of the teenager, like, oh my God, my parents are so embarrassing. Like, even into my 20s and even into my early 30s, I just, there was no way something like that was gonna be in the film. But then my parents had passed, and I was looking at it from a much different perspective. I guess more as a parent myself, and I really could empathize with her in a way that I wouldn't have been able to had I made this film in the early 2000s as I had originally planned. And then the other thing was that in the early 2000s, I mean, the world was still standard definition, and so I felt like the footage back then still, and also kidnapping was still a major problem in Colombia. So I felt like there was a lot more relevancy, and the footage still had a more kind of like modern look to it. But when I came back to it, I realized all of a sudden that it was like a time capsule. Enough time had gone by that it's like, wow, look how big those cell phones are, and everybody's wearing tapered jeans, and oversized shirts and things like that. Which those are all, like, to me, really great details about sort of the era that I wouldn't have been looking at, had it come out very shortly afterwards. Then, in the early 2000s, the 90s, it just kind of happened. We're ready to keep moving on, So, it affected things in so many ways.
So that kind of leads me actually to our next question is, so much time had passed between when, you documented everything, and we are kind of curious how much footage you actually had. But also, what sort of techniques did you find you needed to do to fill in gaps? Because, your original intention for filming was just for your father. You weren't like, hey, here's my movie that I'm going to make later. Like, this is just to show like what you guys were going through. So what kind of techniques and challenges did you find you needed to fill in those gaps?
Well, I mean, right from the get-go, even in the earlier stages of the film, the obvious ones were interviews with the pertinent, people that were in the film. And I was going to do it in a traditional, in fact, I did it in a traditional way. I shot interviews like they were talking head interviews. But as I said earlier, it was a standard definition world. And I shot all that stuff in, glorious standard definition. And it looks really great. But, when I had to revisit it all, I was like, I can't, what am I going to do with this stuff? Like, the original footage, the archival footage is always, it's always acceptable. It's archival, it's historical, but like the interview stuff, not as much. It didn't look as good as documentaries look these days. And my mom had already passed, and I'd spent a lot of money and time in the past, getting all those interviews. I was like, I don't have the energy to do all that again. And so it kind of pushed me, and my producer who came on board, he was one of the ones that really encouraged me to do it as well, just to replace those talking head pieces with the archival footage. And I didn't believe that I could do it at first. In fact, in my hiatus, my 8-year hiatus, I saw Senna by CIFF45 about the Brazilian race car driver. He also, the filmmaker, also did Amy about Amy Winehouse, the documentaries. And one of his techniques is that he just kind of leaves you in the world. He doesn't cut to the talking heads. And when I first saw Senna, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, that's so immersive, and I loved it so much. But I was almost depressed about it, because I was like, I don't think my film could ever do that. But through the encouragement of my producer and just giving it time, I was, I eventually resolved my dilemma of this antiquated talking head footage by covering it all up with the original footage. And I mean, once that started to happen, I could never go back. But I just, because I had shot the footage in this home video way, and also I wasn't a filmmaker. That year was the process of me becoming a filmmaker. It sort of happens before. I mean, it's sort of a sub thing that's happening in the film, but I become one as time goes on. And to the point where all of a sudden I was like, wow, I could do this as a career or whatever. And I'd never even thought about something like that, prior to. Yeah.
No, that's really great. And your last comment brought me to kind of the next thing, is that I love, toward the end of the film, you say, I'm making a documentary, or I made a documentary. Was that always your intention? Like, were you immediately like, I'm going to make this into something, the world needs to see this? Or is it really more for you guys?
Right. So it originally was for my dad, and it was also a tool because those of you that have seen it, I mean, it's obviously about this team, this group of people that come together, and we, particularly in more adrenaline, pumping kind of scenarios like paying a ransom, um, we we would use it actually. We would have these crazy, insane days where we're going and picking up drop maps and stuff, and then at night, kind of almost to unwind, we'd watch some of this footage, and then we would just like laugh at each other about like being so ridiculous at this point or at that point. And I almost feel like in a way it became sort of a training tool for us. So that was sort of a secondary thing, but primarily it was home video for my dad. So and I was not a filmmaker, so I'd never thought. I wasn't thinking like a filmmaker. I didn't do establishing shots. I didn't kind of like set things up. So I think that was part of the problem or part of the challenge, I should, in editing it all, was like trying to make it all make sense. The footage alone couldn't tell the story. And because I wasn't shooting it that way. But I mean, I think that's in the earlier 2000s, I was really almost ashamed of the footage because it wasn't professional enough, but this whole time and distance thing made me look at things differently. And I was like, no, the beauty of it is it is so amateurish. It kind of gives it sort of the edge that it needs. Like had this happened today, and I've worked on a lot of projects where I shoot hundreds of hours at a time or whatever, I would have shot it so differently, and I would have kept things really steady and this and that. And it might have looked a lot better, but I don't think it would have had that kind of, the same sort of feeling, and so that's to its benefit now in hindsight, but I didn't think so in the earlier days.
I think that lends really well to the time period in which it happened, because you couldn't have just picked up your iPhone and, like you said, filmed everything like you did. You had to, purchase tape and keep that camera charged and keep it going, and then catalog it and then keep track of it all.
Right. And this is in Colombia at the time. I mean, like getting tape was not easy. And I would have to go to the black market, and I found kind of just crazy, bootleg brands of tape and stuff in order to keep it going, so it was a challenge.
It's so funny.
There we go.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm kind of changing gears a little bit. One of the things you made mention was that your parents wanted to help support those that had either been through a similar experience. Could you talk a little bit about what your family ended up doing to help support some of those people, and then the support you received as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, there were so many times over the years following the kidnapping where I'd be down visiting my parents, and the phone would ring, and it would be the family member of somebody who had been kidnapped, or if my parents had been following it or they'd been part of it, maybe the hostage had been released, and they would rejoice in the great news, because and even if I didn't know the situation, it was always all of us could empathize in a way that obviously other people couldn't. So, but there were times when we'd be having like these regular family meals, and a call would come in, and a wife's husband, her husband might have just been kidnapped or somewhere, and my parents just went into sort of action mode, and the dinner's over, it doesn't matter. It's like, my mom would be talking her through everything she could think of, and same with my dad. And then my dad in particular, well, they also, both my parents did do a few things for security consultancy companies that wanted to have people that had been affected by it. They traveled and talked a little bit about it. But my dad in particular, and he was very proud of this, he became an instructor for the U.S. military for basically, what a hostage goes through. And they gave him, it's like a colonel status, or it's like an honorary type of thing for his work. He did it for years. And
Wow.
and I was fortunate enough to he would try and get me to, come with him at times. And I would show a little bit of video and be like, I'm going to make this movie soon. And I would tell him about, what's going to happen. And I mean, I feel so, not, it feels funny saying that now because this is a long, long time ago. But I'm glad I had that opportunity because I got to witness my dad telling his side of the story, which, I mean, I heard these stories myself, but enough times that they're sort of really ingrained in my head. And also, more importantly, like these like really strong soldiers, men and women that had been through a lot or been trained for a lot and everything, that would just be, moved almost to tears or whatever by his experience, was really something. And as far as your second part, which was like the help that we received, I mean, yeah, right from the get-go, as soon as my dad was taken and we realized it was actually indeed a kidnapping, particularly in Colombia at the time. It's in the mid 90s. It was an epidemic of kidnappings. When there was no place in the world that had more kidnappings than Colombia, and there were multiple people per day being taken. And that's not, we're not just talking about foreigners. We're talking about farmers and things like that, all throughout the country, and all sort of at different levels of like ransoms and this and that. So they started coming to us out of the woodwork, like people that we had known that we never knew that had a kidnapping happen in their family would come to us, and they would be like, when my father got kidnapped, when my brother got kidnapped, when our son got kidnapped, this is what we did. And they, really walked us through the whole situation and made it like very clear to us almost from the get-go that this wasn't going to be resolved through the goodness of the guerrillas' hearts. At the very beginning, that's what we were hoping, but it became very clear afterwards that it's business. It was a big booming business, and so people through their own experience came out and laid out the groundwork of what we were going to face. And so in many, through the various challenges that we face in the film, like being put into a silence where they don't speak to you for a month, or a double, or they come back for a second ransom payment. Those things had sort of like, we knew ahead of time that they were very possible that they could happen, simply because of other people's experience and them coming to us and sharing.
So what was it? I mean, thinking about that, like it seems like it's helpful that people are preparing you, but also like to hear those things as someone in their, early 20s, and to hear that about your own father, like what was that experience like? And then also, how did you guys decide who was going to be on that team of people that really carried you guys throughout? And I think that's a beautiful thing throughout the film, that group is core and carries kind of the whole film. How did you guys feel hearing all those things? And then how did you assemble that team from there?
Well, I mean, obviously when I first heard about it, I mean, it was complete panic. I was in my dorm room in college in the States and found out about it on a beautiful Friday afternoon, and like just was in complete shock and panic and just couldn't breathe, and then just regain my composure. I don't remember a lot like after I received the first bit of information from my uncle. But I do remember speaking to my mom and like her saying it was bad, and that so I said I'm going to get on the next plane I can to Colombia. And in those first few days, I mean, the adrenaline was just unbearable, and the worry, and not that the worry ever subsided, but I'll get there in a second. But there was this feeling of because we did hear from people saying, they'll probably be checking you out as a family, like seeing where you live, what kind of car you drive, this kind of just trying to scope you out. And so in those first few days, like we didn't even want to leave the house because we felt like everywhere we went, there was maybe somebody watching us or whatever. And it was a genuinely scary feeling. Mm-hmm. But, a lot like the pandemic, a year ago, not that it's still really scary what everything that's happened and everything, but we've all sort of learned, like, think about where you were a year ago and how it's like, I don't know about going to the grocery. How do I, and now I go to the groceries. I don't even think, I put on my mask and I go, right. And we learn how to get on with things. And it didn't take very long for us to get to that point, because you can't, particularly over a sustained period of time, you just can't survive in that. So, in that sort of mode. So, I mean, human beings have an amazing ability to adapt to, you think you'll never, I remember reading about hostages when I was a kid. There was a lot of that stuff going on in Lebanon and stuff in the 80s. And I just remember being horrified about thinking I could never survive that, or something like that happened to my family. And then lo and behold, it did happen. And as horrible as it was, I mean, you take things one day at a time, and you slowly adapt to things, you know. And then as far as the group, I mean, it was almost a group like that by default, because we lived in this little compound with just a few houses, and one of the houses, the one right next to us, was this German family, and my parents had already become incredibly close to them almost from the beginning, and they lived there together, close to each other for a number of years already. So, I mean, even the day that I arrived back in Colombia, the day after my dad was kidnapped, Uli, the neighbor, the German, like the husband, father, he was the one who drove, and you know, picked me up from the airport. My mom was there as well, but they were just there. They're with us, and I mean, nobody ever found. I mean, we didn't find it. We needed. I mean, it was so hard. It was such a horrific world, like, and scary world to navigate. It was just, there was really great comfort. They were smart people. They were, you know, and then Robert, who is the guy that spoke on the radio for us. I mean, this is obviously fast forwarding, because the Grinders came on board almost like I said, from the get-go. And Uli, the husband, I think he saw, particularly when my brother and I arrived on the scene, he saw that there was a father figure sort of missing, and he kind of took that role on for us. And I mean, he taught me how to tie a tie, you know, and there's a little quick allusion to it in the film. But I mean, he, you know, those are those things, right, that fathers do, and that's what he did, without question. And it was unbelievable. It was so selfless, and it's part of why I felt the need not only to make the film, but to do it right, because I had other, that's in that whole other thing, but I had other opportunities for other people to take it over and do recreations and this and that. And I'm like, no, this is not the story. The story is these people, you know, and like, people are gonna be like, screw the neighbors, we can write them out or whatever. It's like, that's not how I felt about it. You know, I owe so much to them for what they did. And Robert was my best friend in Colombia. I met him my very first day of school when we moved to Colombia a few years before. And I mean, he taught me everything about Colombia. And he loved my dad. My dad loved him. And then, you know, he wanted to, after my dad was kidnapped, he wanted to do anything he could to help. And he was just always over, just wanting to help. And we needed somebody when the circumstances presented themselves in such a way that we could be negotiating, or that we were going to begin negotiations with the guerrillas, and we needed somebody to speak on the radio. It's kind of crazy now in retrospect. At the time, it seems like the absolutely natural decision was for Robert to be the person to speak on the radio. But now, as an older person, you know, he was so young, and I mean, he had no experience. And from what we learned later on, you know, if companies, anybody that have their employees kidnapped, they use people like lawyers. Lawyers are pretty good negotiators, right? That's what they do. But Robert just was, I mean, he was a college student at the time, right? So it was kind of nuts, but he was committed, and we could trust him. And it's all about trust. There were very few people we could trust. We couldn't really trust people from the company, and we couldn't trust the military. We couldn't trust the police. So we had to just turn in, you know, as inwards and keep it as small as we possibly could. And so that's a long answer to your question.
No, that's great.
No, that's amazing.
So you mentioned earlier how your decision to not use the on-camera interviews and treat them like a narration. So that was one of the changes you made, but were there any other components that you had filmed or parts of that didn't make the version that we saw that you wish you could have, that for either for time or didn't necessarily add to it? What was maybe omitted that you feel that you would like to share?
Or was there anything?
Or was there? Yeah.
Honestly, I got, this is if anything, I got what I wanted. I got the film that I wanted, right? And so no, really there isn't. I mean, there's a few scenes here and there that are funny or whatever, but like I also know that the film runs long as it is, and yeah, sure, there's always small things, but the you have to kill your babies, it's a terrible thing, but it's when you look at things like the greater whole, like, then it's worth it. Like, I don't even think about anything that I lost. There were plenty of things. I went down to Colombia, I shot some B-roll, I hung out of the side of a helicopter and shot all this stuff. There's some of this like really shaky stuff that I used, and like just a few snippets here and there. It was.
So you went back.
Oh yeah, I did.
You went back.
Yeah. Well, so that was in 94 through 95. And then I went back 10 years later in 2005, when I was still in my process of doing interviews. So I went and interviewed Robert and Oscar, who was the FBI agent that helped us out, and wanted to get these helicopter shots. So yes, I did go back. I would go, I mean, I wish I could go back tomorrow. I mean, it's one of my favorite places on earth, despite the fact that one of the worst things that ever happened, happened there. But I don't blame Colombia. It was just the circumstances, and it was just the time. Yeah, the time.
Yeah, no, and I think that kind of speaks to, I'm thinking about, you mentioned the length of time that, whether it was the breaks or, the different phases this went through. Can you talk a little bit about just that timeline that happened after to get this film to its release day where it is now, and some of the steps that you went through? You mentioned, people offering to take the story and, do other things, and what was that sort of timeline?
You had a GoFundMe we saw credited.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So that's it. So, but like further back, particularly around the time that the Proof of Life film was released, there was some real interest in, oh wow, you've got this footage, and but just like fresh out of college, I think, and I knew I had something special, and so I mean, money was offered to me, like not a huge amount, but enough, like for when you first get out of college, you're just like, wow. I mean, it could have made a real difference. And that's one thing I think that I'm really proud of. Like, I'm not about tooting my own horn or anything like that, but I'm really proud that I like never wanted to sell out like what the original vision was. And I also felt like, everybody has to be a first time. Any filmmaker has to be director has to be a first time director at some point, right? Well, I mean, it's like, why should this go to anybody else? This is my story to tell. And I feel like if I can cut out as many middle people in between and just like tell it the way I feel like it should be told, tell it the way I feel like I remember it happening, then you as the viewer are going to get the most pure sort of like iteration of the story, right? I mean, it isn't nothing. I'm biased. I put things a certain way, and so that influences how you see it as the viewer or whatever. But for the most part, like, I really stuck with that idea. But people didn't want, like, in the beginning. So in the beginning, I was going to do it myself. And then I found out it takes a lot of money and it takes time to make a documentary. So maybe I need some partners. Maybe I need some help. And everybody that I would go to at that point would all say, this is great. We love the footage. This is a great idea, but we need somebody else to direct it. You can have meaningful input. And so I just moved. I talked to people in London. I talked to people in New York. I talked to people in LA about it. And and then, I got rejected for grants from Sundance, and I mean, just all kinds of things that just was like, man, should I even be making this film? But I finally, in about 2008, got to a point where was about to sign a deal with a partner, and then the stock market, the whole economy tanked, and and it all just like everything just started crumbling down. And then all of a sudden they got cold feet about investing money.
Mm.
And then like 2 weeks later, my mom got diagnosed with cancer. I mean, so I felt like I was so close. And then I literally, I mean, that was it. I didn't touch it. I dealt with my mom's illness for a year. She passed away. And then my dad very unexpectedly, after, not too long afterwards, died of a heart attack. It was just a blow. It like, I just never, and not only, as a son or whatever, but if you think just in terms of the film, since we're speaking about the film, I mean, it was supposed to be home video for my dad. And to me, they were supposed to be there in the audience, the night that it premiered. I mean, and my dad had seen little snippets of the footage here and there, but he'd never seen anything like really pieced together, like, the story really told. And he'd written books, himself. So, I mean, I think of him as a storyteller. He would appreciate a good story. That was always I mean, I totally expected it to go that way. And so when it didn't, it was a really, really hard thing to get over for me. But what I did was, during that time period, I started, because I had up until then, I had a bunch of really cool camera experience working on behind the scenes and on Hollywood feature films, and just amazing stuff. But that didn't mean that I could actually tell a story. It didn't prove that I could put a story together. And I found that out in the, right up to close to 2008, when I was trying to seek investors. Like, it didn't matter if you did all this camera stuff. I mean, you haven't really put anything together. So after my parents died, I started working on other people's projects and, editing somebody else's documentary, and then, maybe directing my own smaller things here and there, and then co-directing a bigger documentary with another filmmaker, and just really getting that experience, so that because I always knew it didn't matter like what I was doing and how deep into it I was, that I knew in the back of my mind that I was going to come back to this film. And, I see it now, kind of, now that I'm a little bit removed from all that time period, I see it as like absolutely training. Like maybe I thought at the time I'm just doing it to make some money and whatever, but for the next 2 months or whatever, but all of it was I mean, learning and making mistakes and learning, and and all that, like, as part of like gaining the experience and the confidence within myself, to, when it came time to revisit the film, that I wouldn't stop this time, that I would complete it and fulfill my dream, as corny as that sounds. And finally in 2017, I had I've been sort of frustrated by some projects I've been working on, and I was like, what am I waiting for? As I said earlier, the 25-year anniversary was coming, and I was like, man, if there's ever a time to do it, it's now. And so I sat down, and pretty much, other than when people would call me, and I absolutely, I mean, I had to pay bills, right? So I mean, I would do these other jobs, but it was almost like an annoyance, because like, once that process began, I just couldn't. I became obsessed, and I couldn't stop.
Yeah. I think some of what you said in there transitions really nicely. We're going to go to some of our student submitted questions, and a couple of them center around filmmaking and things like that. The first one we have is from a student named Phoebe, and she said, what was your biggest takeaway from making this documentary, and what do you hope others take away as well?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out my biggest takeaway from making the documentary. Well, I don't know. It sounds really cheesy, but it's like, I mean, I set this goal, and I cannot tell you, it's not an exaggeration to say that it was just maybe dozens and dozens and dozens of times that I absolutely said to myself, this is never going to happen, so to have finally accomplished that goal, and I mean, it's only just come out recently, it's unreal. I'm really having a hard time processing it, because even though the film has been close to complete for a little while and it's been doing the festival run, it just it still felt like I like a form of purgatory. Like I wasn't going to heaven, or was it going to hell? And I just found out it's heaven. Like it's come out. Like it's done what I wanted it to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many people that aren't fortunate enough to I mean, they might start on something and they just never finish it. And I'm really one of the lucky ones that was able to to make it happen. But wait, what was the other part of your question? You
What do you hope other people take away from it as well?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the story of making the film, I just, we hear it all the time and everything, but persistence, and I mean, just don't give up, just don't, just keep going. And it's never easy. I mean, I hope, that's the truth. Like nothing that's good and nothing that's worthwhile is easy. It just isn't that way. So, I mean, as filmmakers, I hope people can take the story of the making of it, take that way. But as viewers, maybe it's learning to rely on your friends, trust in the people closest to you to overcome really what seems completely impossible or insurmountable, take things, one day at a time. I just hope that, yes, it's about, miracle fishing is about kidnapping in Colombia in the mid-90s, and it was a very specific thing, but I kind of, I hope that people would be able to see, like, hey, I can, if I can just rely on my tight circle of friends and the people that I trust the most, maybe I can actually, and most importantly too, keep a stiff upper lip. I mean, this is the thing that I really try to convey in the film, was the humor that we had. It seemed like maybe at first I worried that maybe it would be people would perceive it as being really inappropriate, but people that survive, there's a lot of stories of survival out there. And a lot of times it's because people were able to kind of make light of their situations. You have to have humor in your life. And we did during the time. And I certainly wanted some of that to come across in the film as well. But just that, you have to turn to, even as maybe you're going through the worst thing on earth and you feel like it's almost like disrespectful to the awful thing you're going through to put on candles and play some nice music, but it isn't. I mean, it's a survival mechanism, and you just have to do what you have to do to survive. And I hope people get that.
So we have another question from Carly. She says, do you have any advice for a student like me who wants to do what you do, but doesn't have a story to tell like you did?
I just know from working on sets, the people that really stand out to me are the people that are willing. When I came out of college, I grew up in a scientific background. My dad had a PhD. Everybody I grew up with had PhDs. And I thought, okay, I've had some life experiences. I'm a smart guy, whatever. And I started off doing chairs, like a props PA, and making sure that the chairs were behind the actors at all times and everything. And it was really I was like, man, I went to college for this. Why did I do all this? But I promise you, I was like, I'm just going to I'm going to bring that, I'm going to make sure that I get those chairs out as quickly as I can and as fast as I can, and make sure they're clean, and then ask what else I can do. And I knew I wanted to be in the film industry. I knew I didn't want to be doing that so what I had to do was, rather, because I've seen too many people come in and that work's beneath them, and their attitude is that work is beneath them, and it doesn't fly. It doesn't fly with people that are making those hiring choices. if it's really, people want to work with people they like. They just do. And people, and obviously we're not just doing this job because of the, the drudgery of it and, just to pay the bills. People that join the film industry tend to do it because they love film, or, they love certain aspects of filmmaking or whatever. And if you want to stay in it, if you want people to say, you know what, I remember that person, they were great and their attitude is great, and they should be back on our team. It's all about a good attitude, and never think that you're too good to do. I mean, granted, I mean, there's a limit, obviously, and you want to keep your self-respect, and you should never be treated wrongly, or let yourself be treated incorrectly by people and all that. But people want a hustle, people that are willing to hustle and give it their all and not be above it. If you know what, if you have to serve snacks on a film set as a craft service person, get the camera crews water, in between. Read when you can do it, so you're not holding production up. But don't just sit there and wait and stand around, because you're a dime a dozen. Make yourself stand out.
Absolutely. Some
Good
of our
advice.
live Q&A questions, and we'll encourage people to keep submitting those kind of as we go. Somebody asked, what was the restoration process like for the film that you had originally shot? Did you have to do anything new to it? What was the process like of kind of bringing that piece together?
No, I didn't do anything to the film. In fact, there really wasn't anything I could do to the film. I probably, that's not true. There's the funny thing is that, I mean, if we want to get all technical, I use Firewire to get it in a long time ago, and I probably could have ingested the footage at a high, as uncompressed and stuff later on. I never did it. I don't know that, I mean, it looks so bad to begin with. Like, if it just has like a few more pixels of this or that there, I mean, whatever. I don't think anybody would notice, particularly in a film like this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was simply done. It was all ingested by Firewire in the early 2000s. Firewire doesn't exist anymore. No. Yeah, antiquated. And other than that, it was completely edited that way. And then we found a great colorist, in the end. And she had a completely light touch. It was just adding a little contrast, a little bit more blacks to the black, and making the color balance, as consistent as possible. Other than that, that was it.
That's really cool.
That's cool. We've had asked a couple times, more or less, what has been your greatest accomplishment about either the release of the film or this process of the film?
Well, I literally, for me, my it's really cool that it's on TV or whatever. I love the fact, I'm a music person, really. I like, first, and like I always was prior to thinking that I would ever be a filmmaker or whatever. And I love the fact that the soundtrack, I'm driving my car and I asked Siri to play the soundtrack to Miracle Fishing. And I'm not a musician, but I worked really closely, and so did the whole team did with the composer, and I love that. It's just like a small little detail, but it's just a really wow, I didn't create the music, but I had a big hand in that. And that's a pretty cool, smaller thing. But I literally, to make the film, I'm in Dallas, Texas. I moved here for a TV show when I first got out of college, because I thought it would be good to get some set experience. Walker, Texas Ranger, for you fans of.
No way.
Yeah. I thought I would get a little bit of experience and move to Los Angeles, at least getting some set PA experience. And it's 22 years later, and I'm still here. And a huge reason for that is because I wanted to make this documentary, and I would get jobs along the way and make some money, and then I'd be like, okay, I've got enough money that I can keep it going a little bit longer here and there. Cost of living was cheaper here. That's why I stayed. And then I had my own family, and I started raising them here. And then it was like, I don't know if I want to leave anymore. I have almost kind of like made all the key decisions of my life based around this film. Like, I'm not leaving Dallas because I got to get this film done. I turned down employment in Los Angeles. This is my biggest regret employment wise. If somebody's offering you a full-time position to move to Los Angeles, take it, you know, don't be stupid. This was in 2003, had that and it was to do behind the scenes on feature films, which I was able to do as a freelancer, and which was great. But I had a company offer me a job as a full-time person, and I turned it down because I was like, maybe in a year or two, but I've got to finish this film. That was in 2003. I stayed in Dallas. So what's my biggest thing? I'm free. Like, that's what the craziest thing. It's like, it's gone on for so long. I haven't even thought about, you know, what the next possibilities could be. And now all of a sudden here it is. And that's just the biggest, most wonderful relief, is that I can do whatever I want right now, whatever.
I like that. I think that speaks a lot to the process of making films. And I think people don't realize that it's a lot of that. It's a lot of hard work and sacrifice and those types of things too. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Another question we had is kind of talking about the release. You know, all of this happened right around the pandemic. So what were some of the challenges that came with the release of the film, and what has that been like?
I mean, this has been a challenging time for everybody. So, you know, it's
yes,
that but the film almost completely like timed perfectly with the pandemic. So it's after all that time, and then we finally got into Tribeca. Oh my gosh, this is like just the dream of a lifetime. And there, obviously the film has this team of people. None of the people had seen the film, and so we were all going to be in New York together, and that was gonna be that. There were so many times sitting right here, just like, I'm never gonna finish it, and I would think about that moment of like, one of these days I'll be sitting with this German family or Robert, and we're gonna watch it. And so, wow, it was actually gonna happen. And then, I mean, you could see it in January. You kept hearing about this pandemic, and then February things were getting worse, and it was coming to New York. And by February I was like, it's going to screw this whole thing up. It's going to. And then, you know, clearly then South by Southwest got canceled, and it was only a matter of time before Tribeca did. So when it did, I mean, I wasn't all that shocked, but it was not the year that I expected. I mean, I basically had imposed self-isolation on myself for like 3 years prior to when it became, you know.
You were prepared.
Like, yeah, but I was ready to do the opposite. I was like, okay, I've been in my shell, and now I'm ready to come out into the world and like reconnect and travel and do all these things. And then the pandemic happened, and it's just like, my festival experience has been sitting literally right here in the same place that I made the film, and where I'm talking to you now. But you know, so it was different. It definitely wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And I think the most unfortunate thing was that dream of getting the team together to all watch it as one in a room with people. That didn't happen, and it can't happen now, because it's sort of been piecemeal. Different people have seen it at various times here or there, or, you know, I think that's really it. It's not been what I expected, but it was something completely different. And I thought I was really worried that it might have killed any chances for the film to get out into the world. And then lo and behold, it did make it out. And so it's okay. It was all okay. I mean, whatever, it all happened for a reason. But it's just part of to me, it was appropriate in a way, because it taken so much to make the film that it was like, it was never going to be easy. It was never easy to begin with. So why should the release be easy?
In some twisted way, it made a little bit of sense.
It did. It made complete sense.
Another question that we had that seemed to be kind of asked a couple times was there ever a point that you felt that you were going to stop filming during the kidnapping where you're like, I don't have it in me to keep filming? And what was your motivation to keep that going?
Yeah, I mean, closer to the end, in after we paid that second ransom, and we were, like I said earlier, we almost had a roadmap almost throughout the whole process, but we were actually at our lowest low in the whole story because we, like we were venturing into territory that we hadn't really heard about, and we were all so down that I didn't really feel like picking up the camera, and I didn't do much picking up the camera, but it luckily was sitting at the right place in the living room when my dad came home, so I was able to pick it up and start. No, what the crazy thing is that, and you mentioned that you were going to ask about it earlier, and not that I'm holding you to it or anything, but it's only 27 hours of footage, 27 hours,
Wow.
and which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you would think in a way, oh, well, you should have been able to edit it a lot easier. But it was that I had only this amount and I had to make it all right. I thought I was filming so much of the time. And I just couldn't imagine that anybody would film any more than that. But years later, as a professional, I learned that, that's like a week's worth of work, so, well, not quite, but still, what's crazy is that from a documentary perspective, I forget what the math is, but the ratio of 27 hours put into, it's like an hour and 40, let's say it's 2 hours long. It's less like a 10%, or it's less, like 8% or whatever. It's a pretty amazing ratio. Yeah. I think for documentary. So no, I don't think I was filming enough to really feel like I needed to stop. I wish I'd started earlier was the main thing. Because it didn't actually start until 5 months into the kidnapping. And if I had, that's one of the regrets, is that I really wish that I had had the foresight to start earlier, but it was a process. But that became really difficult for me. That was probably the hardest part, and still to this day, the first 20-25 minutes of the film I dislike the most, because it's all kind of set up. It's all sort of making something out of nothing. And then there comes a point to where the story actually catches up with the footage. And that's when I feel like every time I watch it, I breathe a big sigh of relief, I can tell a real difference in the film at that point.
Well, using your dad's writings really helped with that. That was so cool. I mean, how amazing to have written word from your dad while he was, kidnapped.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was the crazy, like this. I love that sort of crazy parallel between, that I documented it and then he comes back and but I will say, and this is kind of answering an earlier question about how things changed as it went along. The diaries were I always knew I wanted to utilize them, but for the longest time, they were very clear. They were, like longer passages. So you knew very clearly what was going on. And you knew that it was day 27, and you knew it was day 227, and so you could see this progression, and you knew it was Tom Hargrove's diary. And then actually the director of a film called Monos, which was, you need to watch it. His name is Alejandro Landes. It's a film actually about Colombian rebels, because they're almost, people that held my father were like 14-year-olds. They're all like children practically. So he has made this film about the rebel side, but they're all like children. It's kind of like what's the one, the pigs, the kids that take over the island.
Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies, thank you, not pigs. There's Piggy, right? Piggy's one of the characters.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a Lord of the Flies type of film. But he really was like, he gave me this great suggestion of like, why don't you just try and make it more cryptic? Because you're like, it's not landing the way it was taking too long to read, blah blah blah, all these things. And by just kind of zooming in and just using words or phrases to kind of like get you into it, my hope, I mean, I can't say that this is how you took it, but my hope was that as a viewer that doesn't know the story, you're like, is that is that his handwriting?
Yeah.
Yep.
His diaries. Yeah, those have got to be his diaries. How do they get the diaries? Like, like, I mean, and
Definitely.
like, and without that answer, it kind of it kind of helps with the suspense. And then the payoff, like when you knew that it was day 72 and you knew it was day 200 and you knew it was a diary, the payoff wasn't quite the same as it became later. Like once you made it more cryptic and then he does the reveal where he pulls his money belt out, I felt like that it certainly made it much more powerful because it was answering a question at that point.
Right, absolutely. It's funny that you say that you didn't start filming until 5 months in, because as a viewer, I don't think I would have even realized that, like that it was pieced together in other ways prior to that timeline. So at what point, and this will kind of be our last question because we are getting toward the end of time and we want to give you your evening. But what made you start filming at that point? What made you, what changed, or what, what changed for you or for the situation that you were like, I just need to document this?
Well, I mean, really quickly, just a few things. One was that the negotiations had begun. It took a long time for negotiations to begin. And so much of it was out of our hands in the beginning. We were just sort of waiting on people. So there wasn't really much sort of physical action to document. And I thought it would be resolved a lot quicker. I didn't realize that we were going to have to be so involved. I just had no idea what that journey was going to be like. But then when it sort of worked itself out to, hey, we're the ones who are doing all this. And I mean, this is crazy. We're dealing with like FBI agents and we're going to bathrooms and stuff. It was something completely different. But it was my mom, really, and time. I mean, like 5 months into it, when you watch it as a documentary, it's an action-packed hour and 47 minutes. There's a lot going on, even the like nothing going on, right? It's like, but there was really more of that nothing going on than there was anything else. So, and I'm a creative person or whatever, and I just needed some sort of an outlet. And my mom could see my frustration. I think the first thing I started doing was a scrapbook. Like I took some photos and I'd be like, oh, here's, us eating dinner. And like, I was like, this is awful, whatever it was I was starting to do. But there was so much time on our hands. I needed to find a way to fill the day. My dad had always told me, he had been a soldier in Vietnam. He had really horrible experiences happen to him. And he had always told me, like, try and document, if you're ever in war or whatever, try and document it. Or like, he meant more of a diary. But that wasn't my thing at the time, but I could hold the family, video camera. And, so it was really my mom, just kind of just seeing her son depressed and needing some sort of creative outlet that could ultimately be a cool thing for her husband, or my dad. So.
That's so great.
Yeah, I think what you say about your mom right there really touches me in regards to what, not only did you dedicate it to both your parents, but if your mom inspired you to keep it going, but also your dad saying, you have it on camera, how he always knew you would. Like he never lost hope that you guys would do what you needed to do. And to have captured that and to have gone through all that, I mean, wow, just incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the whole thing is just nuts. It's that we went through it, and that it was documented, and that the film actually got made. And but anyway, yeah.
Well, we want to thank everyone so much for attending this evening. Miles, we want to thank you so much for your time. This has been amazing. If for some reason people have not seen the film yet, it is available through the Cleveland International Film Festival right now. You can watch it all the way up until April 20th. It is available. You can use code SHAPE for $1 off any film festival ticket. Support local film festivals. They're great. We really, really love the Cleveland International Film Festival. Anything else? Go ahead.
And if you don't get the opportunity to catch in the festival, it is actually also available on Discovery Plus. And so it's it's going to be available for a long time to come. So if you haven't seen it, or you have seen it and you loved it, tell your friends, like, watch, check this out. Word of mouth is always a wonderful thing. And it's allowed us to get to this point today, to be here with you, Miles. And so we're definitely very appreciative of your time. I know the students watching are appreciative. They're all, picturing how they're going to go past down, maybe not the kidnapping side of it, but the career side of it. And so it's great to hear your story shared with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And please, any of you, if you have any further questions or whatever, Miracle Fishing's on Facebook. It's got a Facebook page or whatever, and Instagram and all that. And you can always reach out to me if you have any questions about anything. Share with me if you like it, or whatever. I mean, please do. So I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was so great. We really appreciate it.
Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you all of you, and enjoy the rest of the festival.
Bye-bye.
Take care.